Hello once again, everyone, and welcome back to our Wallerstein series, and we are on the penultimate series of techniques. Still working through the sword takings. Now, once again, we're going to have two takings, as it were, that don't actually remove the sword from our opponent's hand. And today my opponent is going to be Ms. Morgan, who I'm very happy to have here with me. Her first time on the channel. So, now what we're going to do is, once again, we're going to go down into the scales, but now we're going to exploit a similar opening to the one that we took when we did the lockup last time, except now we're going to feed through the other way. So if you remember that one, we went between the hands right here. Now we're going to go between the hands on the other side of the wrist. So how we're going to get here is we're going to square up. We're going to once again move down into the scales. Good. And she is going to wind in against me with the short edge. Now I'm going to either push in, but not quite as hard as I did last time, or I can also wind in myself. Either way is just fine. So I'm going to kind of let the sword go back behind me, and I'm going to fish my hand around her face and then through her hands, right? From here, I'm just going to roll it over top, which will take her on her back. Now, at first glance, this looks kind of silly. In fact, when you look at the original depiction, it doesn't look like it has nearly as much power as it does. But really, when somebody winds up at you quickly like this, there's not a ton of leverage here. And specifically, since I'm kind of intertwining myself with her hands, it's quite easy to pull the sword behind someone's head, and they're pretty much at your mercy. The actual image seems to show the idea of me swinging with my left leg behind my opponent's right, which would make taking them over the leg extra easy. Another alternative would be if you got somebody locked up, you can always kick that leg out from them with a nice messy foot sweep or things along those lines. But, once again, come to the scales, boom, she winds up, push in, but not quite against the sword, reach up with a passing step, right? You can either go in front or behind, doesn't really matter. And you're going to look at the back of your hand, then you're just going to feed it over toward their head, okay? And from here, you don't really have a ton of pressure you can exert against me, do you? Not really. And the image shows me just rearing back to do whatever I see fit. So let's go a little closer to the camera to show that action one more time, and then we'll switch sides and do it again. So we come in, boom, you wind up, I push in, feed through. Now I'm just going to wind over. And sometimes the flat of their sword will end up on back of your shoulder. No need to really worry. It's not going to do anything there. So now we'll show it from opposite positions. One right about here. Into the scales, up through, no problem. Relatively simple play, like ridiculously simple play, in fact. That's why it's one of my favorites, is because once again, this isn't something that necessarily appears all that commonly, but it exploits someone who does a wind and then stands there. Or alternatively, another great place to exploit this particular action, you'll see this happen quite a lot, where people they'll come against each other, and then they'll either both try to wind, or one of them is trying to do a shield how or something, and they'll end up like right against each other. Basically, wrist on wrist a lot of the time, sort of here. This is a great time to execute this particular move, and can get you out of a really sticky situation. The only downside being, with heavies, if you're using shorter grips like the Albions, may be a little difficult to get your hand through there, but you can always just pop a little bit lower, more toward the elbows as opposed to toward the wrists, and still achieve the exact same thing. Just think of it as arm wrapping their left arm instead of their right, so great opportunity there. But our second sword taking is going to be very, very familiar. In fact, it's pretty much the same as one that we went over earlier in the series. It's just now we show the completion. Now, sadly, we will not be able to replicate the full majesty of this particular plate, as that would require her to do a back bend, somehow propping herself up with the sword, and I would also have to embed my sword into her stomach, and we just don't have that kind of insurance. But basically what's going to happen, though, is I'm going to come in like I did before. I'm going to step around to the side, put the sword across her neck, and then execute a throw. This time it is meant to be a throw to the ground, which bears the interesting question of, if we went over the same technique earlier, and it is meant to be a throw setup, why didn't they show the termination of the throw? It could be the pages were misordered. It could be that they just didn't feel the need to show it to completion until the end. I don't know. It's one of those mysteries that's lost to time. But either way, what's going to happen is we're going to bind into the scales, and now I'm going to wind up against her, or she can wind up against me, it doesn't really matter. Right? In, which causes her to raise, I'm going to step up, fall over with the half sword basically stepping up nice and close with my thigh. I'm going to put the blade across her neck, and I like to also put my elbow onto their shoulders, so I make a sort of V on either side, and then to execute this throw, all I'm going to do is just raise up my guard, and she'll go down. When done at speed, it doesn't, especially when you do it slow, it doesn't feel like it's got a ton of power, but when done at speed, especially in gear, it's kind of one of the nicer things about having modern gear is it makes people really easy to throw if you can set these up right. People just pretty much drop. So let's show that again. Just in and down. Now we'll show it from the other side. Sometimes, depending upon where their sword ends up, you may need to do a slight hooking action with your pommel or what have you. Or you can even do the hook with your forearm. It's kind of whatever. This one can also be quite good if someone just straight up retreats from you as you're coming in for the half sword. You can either launch into a thrust or alternatively chase them and fall over. The biggest thing about making this throw work is getting your thigh behind them and also making sure to get that shape on either side of their neck. But otherwise, that's our penultimate plays, right? I'm using that word again. I hope I'm using it correctly. But either way, thank you very much for joining me on the channel. And we shall be going over the last two Wallerstein plays next week. I'm really sad to see this series coming to an end. I mean, it's been a lot of fun. But we'll have all our soppy farewells next time. So thank you very much for watching. And we'll go over some other techniques another time.